In the latest from the Israel-Hamas War, 24 hostages have been released by Hamas and 39 prisoners have been released by Israel as part of a temporary truce. Now, the war between Israel and Hamas, which has been raging for weeks, finally witnesses a few moments of peace. Families on both sides of the war are now reuniting with their lost and loved ones. Have a look at these visuals, and this is where it all began. This is how Hamas handed over Israeli hostages to the Red Cross, and most of the hostages were aged, and the youngest was a 2-year-old. Now, the hostage swap was two-way. The hostages released Friday from Gaza included 13 Israelis, 10 Thai citizens, and 1 Filipino citizen. Qatar, who is mediating the truce, also said that they're hopeful that American hostages will also be released, and at least 4 U.S. citizens who are women and children will be released soon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted to this development last night and welcomed the hostages back into the country.
השלמנו עכשיו את החזרת ראשוני חטופינו. ילדים, האימהות שלהם, נשים נוספות, כל אחת ואחת מהן עולם ומלואו. אבל אני מדגיש לכם, המשפחות ולכם אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו מחויבים להחזרת כל חטופינו.
A crowd of jubilant Israelis welcomed children and women who were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza for 49 days. The hostages were transported by helicopters to the hospital in central Israel, and the hostages upon entry into Israel were subjected to a thorough medical examination, and the hostages were declared to be healthy and safe.
About half an hour ago, I was thrilled to be the one to receive 4 children, 3 mothers, and a grandmother to the best and most caring hands here at Schneider Children's Medical Center of Israel. Their physical condition is good, and they're currently undergoing medical and emotional assessment by the medical and psychological team here at Schneider's. We designated a special area that is very private, and there is also a team from our neighbor Beilinson Hospital that is assisting us in taking care of the women.
Another 5 women who were Hamas's hostages were transported aboard a chopper to the Wolfson Medical Center in Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Palestinians are rejoicing the return of 39 prisoners held in Israeli jails. A massive crowd gathered and cheered as prisoners arrived in Bithunia town outside West Bank's Ramallah. The release of the 39 prisoners is part of the truce deal.
الوضع جوا صعب على الاخر، صعب الوضع، يعني ما اقدرش اوصف الوضع جوا قد ما هو صعب. كيف يعني؟ يعني تطلعش من الغرفه، ما فيش اكل زي الخليج، ما بجيب لك وجبات طعام منيحه.
حريتنا لم تكتمل الا لتحرير اخر اسير بسجون الاحتلال. مشاعر الفرح مغلفة بالحزن على المجزرة التي يرتكبها الكيان الإسرائيلي بحق شعبنا بقطاع غزة. بنوجه تحية الوفاء والنصر لأهلنا بقطاع غزة. فاليوم نقدر نحكي إنه إحنا حطمنا السلاسل وأغلقت زنزانة التحقيق.
Essential aid has also begun to flow into the Gaza Strip after the truce came into effect, and trucks loaded with humanitarian aid entered Gaza through the Rafah border. 137 trucks of goods had been offloaded in Gaza, making it the biggest convoy received since October 7th. Now, up next, Israel has also received a list of hostages who are set to be freed today by Hamas, and this will mark the second day of the planned 4-day truce. And for more on this, joining me now is Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, who is a military expert and also hosts a deep dive show on YouTube. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Davis.
Thanks for having me.
I'll begin with the first question, which is the latest that we have and a biggest breakthrough in this ongoing war between Hamas and Israel. Now, today we are on the second day of the truce deal, but yesterday 24 hostages were released by Hamas in exchange for 39 Palestine prisoners. Where do you think is this deal going to lead to in the war?
Well, I'm afraid it's not going to have much of an impact on the war. In fact, the Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant earlier very emphatically declared that this war was going to continue on and that this was not a ceasefire in the traditional sense. It was just a pause in the fighting to allow the hostages exchange to go on back and forth. But once that's finished, he said they're going to continue to go right back on the objective of destroying Hamas. So this will be a pause temporarily. And of course, the people of Palestine are the biggest benefactors because they get a chance to, at least for a few days, to have the bombs and aerial bombardment stop and for food and water to get in. So they're taking every advantage of that. But it is a temporary situation and it's going to continue on where it left off, I'm afraid.
So as you mentioned that it is a temporary situation, and of course we knew that as per the reports, because Netanyahu made it pretty clear that the war will resume after the truce is over. So now let's talk about the deal, how this deal that hinged on hostage release in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners has given time and space for truckloads of aid and scores of aid finally made accessible to Gazans. But the real question here is that as the aid finally enters for the Gazans, they brace again for the war to resume. So what happens to the situation in Gaza as they brace for the war to resume again?
Yeah, and that's a lot of concern about that because, Israel had required 1 million people thereabouts to vacate the northern part of Gaza, south of the Wadi Gaza, so that they could conduct their operations in the north. When that's finished, and actually even before that's done, all evidence shows that Israel is about ready to move into the southern part of it. So now then you have close to 2 million people squashed into an area that did have about 1. And so the density of people is going to be much higher. If there has been over 13,000 casualties among the innocent Palestinian population, one can only imagine how much higher that's going to be when the Israeli Defense Forces moves into the south. And that is a great deal of consternation, both among many Western and European nations, as well as, of course, the Arab regimes in the region. And it's a lot of controversy about, the rules of engagement that the Israeli forces are applying to themselves and different interpretations of that. And it's a dicey game because Israel wants to destroy the Hamas terrorists that actually attacked Israel on 10/7. But if they go too far and are careless with the civilian population, they could lose Western support, and then they could gain the ire of many Arabs in the region, and eventually could even cause a new front to open up in the north with Hezbollah out of Lebanon. That remains to be seen, but there is a risk if Israel goes too heavy with the casualties, that could happen.
Sure, I mean that's a point that you've pointed out, which is worth focusing on, and I would want you to elaborate on this. You've already mentioned the approach that Netanyahu has taken at this point in the war. Now, this could open up more fronts if he goes too far. But what about within Israel? We saw many families protesting outside Netanyahu's office. What happens? What do you think? What kind of sentiment will now resonate within the Israelis after this call of 4-day truce has been arrived at?
Yeah, there's a lot of dispute within the Israeli community itself that there is a certain group that says, no, we can't talk to the Hamas at all. We can't make these negotiations. It's only going to help them. We need to keep the pressure on. We don't need to have any pauses. And they say that's what'll get the hostages released. Then you have the families, and of course, they are not in agreement with that for the most part. They want the hostages out first before the Israeli Defense Forces move any further in there and risk killing some of the hostages inadvertently in the very attacks that they're doing against Hamas. Then you also have within the Israeli society a portion of the Jewish people who say, hey, we're going too far and we're actually killing too many of the Palestinians. We're being careless with their lives, and that's not something that they want on their name. And then there's a fourth crew that says, yeah, I'm not even concerned about the Palestinian lives. they were part of the problem, and if they get killed, it's too bad for them. That's a blunt statement, and it's unfortunate, but that is a reality of what we're facing. And so that Israeli government's got a lot of different pressures to balance off on how it operates.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, for joining us and giving us all those insights, and thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Always my pleasure.